Welcome to session 5 of Seeing as Jesus Sees. We're going to talk about seeing the world as Jesus sees. We've talked about seeing ourselves and others through Jesus' eyes, but there's another important part of our vision for which we need fresh revelation from Christ, the world, this big, beautiful, broken, sometimes hateful world that can be so frustrating and frightening. In the book, there's a chapter I call Braving, because when we see everything through Jesus' eyes, we have courage. A big storm looks less daunting through the eyes of the one who can say, "Peace, be still." There's also a chapter in this section I call Conquering. It's about the way to spiritual victory through Jesus' eyes. Jesus saw Satan fall like lightning. He saw that. He wants us to see his victory over evil as well. But maybe the most important transformation awaiting us through Jesus' eyes is the way we view the problems of this world. With so much sin, so much disregard for God and his word, with so much polarization and hate, with so much bad news, it's hard for Christians or anyone not to view the world with anger, worry, and hopelessness. But how does Jesus see the world? Is he as angry as we are? The Roman world into which Jesus was born was idolatrous to the point of emperor worship. Scarcely a day passed without an execution under Herod's regime. The political climate at the time of Jesus' birth resembled that of Russia in the 1930s under Stalin, as one author puts it. House excavations from the first century in Pompeii revealed pornographic art on everyday living room walls. Adult male sexual abuse of underage boys was acceptable. And the world that Jesus entered was, by most moral standards, far worse than ours. But upon rereading the Gospels with Jesus' view of the world in mind, I see a Savior who's more sad than he is mad. When he looks at the immoral, broken world, what does Jesus see that causes him more grief than rage? What is beneath his tears of compassion? On the week of his death, why does Jesus enter Jerusalem with a soft heart rather than clenched fists? I think the answers are healing, and they open our eyes to peace that we've been missing. Several times in the Gospels, we see Jesus look upon the beloved Jerusalem as if she were personal, organic, and alive. On the Sunday before his death, Jesus rode humbly into Jerusalem on a donkey, making his way down from the Mount of Olives and up to the Lion's Gate of Old Jerusalem. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace." He was emotional when he saw the city. His tears on that first Palm Sunday weren't for a hurting individual or a hungry crowd. He was crying for a whole locality. As he wept at the sight of the holy city, he mourned the senseless loss of what the world was created to be. Why was he weeping tears rather than pointing fingers? Perhaps because the brokenness of the world is too complicated to pin the problem on anybody in particular. When I was in second grade, I got a new leather Pee-wee football for Christmas. I was overjoyed just to touch it and smell it. The day after Christmas, I rounded up a game of 3-on-3 football in my best friend's front yard. We proudly used my new football. And in the middle of the game, one of the kids bobbled a pass reception and the ball rebounded into the usually quiet street. But with unfortunate timing, a car passed by at the exact moment that the ball bounced onto the asphalt, hitting it squarely with the right front tire. The pop was loud like a firecracker. At the sound of the explosion, I let out a spontaneous loud yelp as if the car had run over me. And when I retrieved the flattened ball, everybody stood around in silence. It was odd because most of the leather was just brand new and the laces were intact, but it had just split and was irreversibly broken. The other kids said, "Sorry about that, Alan. I wish we could fix it," but it was irreparable. When they switched back to a game of kick the can, I slinked home, went to my room as a 6-year-old boy and cried. The more we feel ownership of the thing, the more we grieve when it's damaged. Jesus saw Jerusalem for what she was designed to be. He saw the world when it was brand new, before it was run over with sin. It's his beautiful world. My flattened football illustration falls short because though I owned the ball, I didn't make it. But when Jesus looked at Jerusalem or at the whole world, he remembered how it was made and that the world was made to be because all things were made through him, John 1:3. Jesus knew that Eden looked like it did because it was a paradise he'd made. Long before innate sin, the world was filled with God's innate goodness. If we look at the world through Jesus' eyes, we see more than individuals. We see cities and cultures and empires. And if we see the world as Jesus do, we see perfect beauty tragically marred. That's worthy of tears. So as Jesus approached the city that would slay him, he was sobbing rather than seething. Why? Perhaps because the tragedy was bigger than a few jealous Pharisees or a squad of Roman centurions or a betraying disciple. The problem was bigger than Jerusalem. Jesus saw the disrepair of a whole world. I mean, the day my football died, I wanted to be mad, but at home. The pass receiver who bobbled the catch, the quarterback who could have thrown the ball away from the road, the defender who broke up the catch, the car driver who didn't swerve, or myself. Why did we have to use my new football in the first place? Part of the problem of being mad at the world is it's hard to know who to be mad at. Something in our flesh wants to be angry, even if we must manufacture a suitable object for our wrath. You ever notice how much easier it is to be mad at the driver in the other car whose name you don't know and whose face you might never see? In real life, face-to-face interactions, we're far less likely to be angry because we realize that real people in real life are complex and their circumstances are nuanced. But unlike all of us born in sin, Jesus never misplaced his anger. He did get angry, but never for the wrong reasons. And he never oversimplified the problem or scapegoated people. Sometimes in life, the football bursts and there's nobody to blame. So I just went back to my room and cried rather than picking a fight. And a lot of people are walking around mad when really they're sad. Psychologist Larry Crabb has asserted that anger arises when we confuse desires and goals. Desires are deep and legitimate and often godly. I might desire my wife's affection. I might desire that my children flourish. Desires aren't bad. They're just not within our control. As Larry Crabb writes, a desire is an object that I may legitimately and fervently want, but cannot reach through my efforts alone. A goal, on the other hand, is an object that is under my control. Goals are objectives that we can do something about. I might desire a healthy body, but my goal must be eat wisely, exercise consistently. So according to Crabb, the appropriate response to a desire is prayer, while the appropriate response to a goal is action. We pray about our desires, we take responsibility for our goals. But anger arises, he taught, when we confuse a desire for a goal. When our goals are blocked, we get mad. But remember, a goal is by definition something within our control. If a wife makes it her goal to have an emotionally sensitive husband, she'll be mad at him when he's insensitive. Wanting a sensitive husband is a wonderful desire, but an illegitimate goal. No wife can control whether her husband is sensitive. It might be healing for her to share her desires with her husband and perhaps the disappointment she feels, but if she feels mad, the anger is misplaced. The appropriate response to an unfulfilled desire is grief. People are mad at the world when it doesn't match their dreams, but it's misplaced anger. What they're experiencing is the sadness of unmet desires. I feel it every day. The world isn't what I want it to be. The more I look at the world through Jesus' eyes, the less I want to bend another's will, and the more I want to fall on my knees, brokenhearted, in earnest prayer, where I join Christ in sweet fellowship. The exalted Christ is sovereign, and one day He will make all things right and new. But during His days on earth and today, Jesus doesn't force the world to be what He wants it to be. He made it His goal to die on the cross because He desires all people to be saved. He desires for all to love Him, but He doesn't force anyone to be His bride. Jesus didn't ride into Jerusalem with a clenched fist, but with a broken heart. And if we see the world through His eyes, we'll find that many of our frustrations melt. No one wants to be sad, but grief is better than rage because there's a balm for sorrow. Misplaced anger is inconsolable, But blessed are those that mourn, for they'll be comforted. When we mask our grief with anger, there's no solace. We rage and rant and damage people while stiff-arming the healing that God offers our grieving souls. I think about another earlier day, there was a similar lament on the Messiah's lips. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets. How often I would have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you're not willing. It's the cry of desire, the groan of deepest longing. Jesus' grief-stricken yearning for the world is like a parent who's pleaded with a wayward child to no avail. I think of King David when he learned that his rebellious son had been killed. The king was deeply moved and wept, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. Would that I died instead of you, oh Absalom, my son." Though Absalom committed treasonous rebellion against his own father, David sobbed and wished he could have taken his son's place on the tree where Absalom's body hung. The son of David felt the same way towards his rebellious beloved. With unfathomable love for all his treacherous children, Jesus took our place hanging on the tree. When I watch how Jesus looks at the brokenness and sin of the world, he reminds me of the mother that I know whose beautiful but anorexic daughter regurgitated her food day after day. Jesus' tears remind me of the grieving father I know whose delightful teenage son overdosed on fentanyl-laced opioids. When Jesus weeps and yearns, would that even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. We get a glimpse of how Jesus sees this fractured world. He doesn't excuse the world's rebellion, but he knows that sin arises from spiritual blindness, and he yearns for us to mature, to be able to see. When we look at the world through Jesus' eyes, our frustrations melt as we grieve rather than rage, and we learn to yearn rather than seethe. And then, with his view, we adjust. We adjust our expectations of the world. The more I see the world through Jesus' eyes, the less I expect non-Christians to act like Christians. It hasn't reduced my desire for everyone in the world to be saved, but it's softened my frustrations. Sheep without a shepherd are always going to act like sheep without a shepherd. The answer isn't better training for the sheep. The answer is to introduce them to the shepherd. Paul put it this way: the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he's not able to understand them because they're spiritually discerned. It's sad when a blind person stumbles, but it isn't infuriating. It's grievous when the sinful world acts so foolishly, but it isn't maddening because Jesus sees the world accurately. He weeps and he longs and offers his life for the lost. You see, it makes an enormous difference when we understand someone, even if they're wrong. When we look at the world through Jesus' eyes, we might lament more, but we'll understand more. Because we do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. He understands. The Son of God became a human in part to understand us. I think of Dean Smith, the Hall of Fame basketball coach from my alma mater, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who is well known for the care he showed all his athletes. And my favorite story about Coach Smith's commitment to his players was shared by Kenny Smith, a former UNC star turned TV announcer. During the late 90s, a power forward named Mokhtar Njai transferred to Carolina for his final 2 seasons. Mokhtar was from Senegal, the first UNC player ever from the African continent. And one day, Njai didn't seem himself at practice. He was just not himself. And afterwards, Dean Smith approached the player. He said something like this: "Coach Smith," he said, "Mokhtar, are you okay?" Mokhtar, looking at the ground, said, "Yes, Coach." Coach Smith said, "Mokhtar, look at me. Are you fine?" Mokhtar kept looking down. Coach Smith said, "Mokhtar, please look me in the eye. Is everything okay?" Finally, the basketball player spoke up, "Coach, in my culture, it is considered a sign of disrespect to look someone in the eye." The next day, assistant coach Bill Guthridge wasn't at practice, nor was he there the next day or the next or the next. Coach Guthridge missed a whole week of practice, and no one knew why until Njai received a call from his mother in Africa. "There's a man here at my house," Mokhtar's mother said. "He claims to be one of your coaches. Could that be possible? He said that Coach Smith sent him here to learn about our culture." Wow. Jesus traveled much further than Coach Guthridge to understand what it's like to be human. He understands your frailties. He understands human weakness. And on one horrid, miraculous day, he even understood what sin and guilt feels like as he drank the cup of suffering to the dregs, absorbing the poison of sin into his own being to offer us life. And when you're tired of the world's folly and feeling irate, ask Jesus how he sees this broken planet. You can let go of your temptation towards another tantrum. Let your tears fuel your intercession. Jesus doesn't excuse the ills of the world, but he understands the frailties behind the folly. Jesus sees, Jesus weeps, Jesus yearns, Jesus understands.